On the trail of the suspected terrorists, Dutch officials say that they're investigating whether someone brought an explosive material to the Amsterdam airport for the suspect to pick up. Now, we're pulling together those many different threads of this developing story, and I want to welcome, joining us now, CNN national security analyst Peter Bergen and George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Thank you for joining us here in the Situation Room. Clearly, let me go to you first, Peter. You have obtained some photos, very interesting photos. These are new to our viewers here on a failed attack of a Saudi prince. An alleged assassin who was killed. He had the similar chemical, PETN. He also had in his underwear. It exploded. The prince survived. He did not. What can we learn from these new pictures that we're seeing about the foiled attack on Christmas?
Well, the pictures that we're seeing on the screen, this is what a PETN bomb looks like when it blows up. You can see that this caused massive damage inside the room. The Prince Nayef, who was the subject of this assassination attempt on August the 27th, is very likely to have survived. The bomber died in this attack, but the modus operandi was exactly the same as the Detroit attack. PETN, about 100 grams of explosives concealed in the underwear. It got through metal detectors. Plastic explosives won't be detected by metal detectors. Al-Qaeda in Yemen took responsibility for the failed assassination attempt against Prince Nayef, and they've also taken credit for the Detroit plot. So in my view, it's the same cell of people who did both attacks. The August 27th assassination attempt looks like a dry run. They learned from that you could get through metal detectors, that this thing would work, and it may be the same bomb maker who put this together, since it's the same, looks like the same cell with exactly the same methodology, Suzanne.
Now, we know that in that case it worked, but in the case on Christmas it did not. What do we know about the difference between the two? Is it an obvious difference here that the reason why that it did not succeed on Christmas and it succeeded then?
It's either operator error or, the initiator in both cases was a chemical explosive of some kind of, and, I'm not an explosives expert.
Sure.
Clearly it didn't work exactly as planned in the Detroit case.
I want to go to you, Jonathan. Clearly, there are some prominent Republicans who are looking at the situation about Muttalib being tried in a military tribunal situation as opposed to the federal court system. And they want a military tribunal. They want to be able to question him, perhaps enhanced interrogations. We heard this from the former Homeland Security Chief, Tom Ridge, on Larry King. I want you to take a listen.
I take a look at this individual who's been charged criminally. Does that mean he's going to get his Miranda warnings? Does that mean the only kind of information we're going to get from him is if he volunteers it? He's not a citizen of this country. He is a terrorist, and I don't think he deserves the full range of criminal protections of our criminal justice system as embodied in the Constitution of the United States.
What do you think about his point that he's making? Are we missing perhaps vital intelligence from Abdul Muttalib on whether or not there are additional attackers who are out there?
I think that's very unlikely. First of all, supposedly he was speaking very freely for some time after his arrest. But what we know from the past, from the Bush torture program, is that it yielded very little information. Information that it did yield was known to be highly suspect. But it's not really about the information that you get from special interrogations, which is a nice way of saying torture. It is also not about what rights he deserves. What is really the question is what rights we have to give people to maintain our credibility around the world. That is, the way the world viewed the Bush administration was that George Bush often looked almost Caesar-like, sending some people to federal courts, some people to military tribunal, some people got no trial at all. In this case, we had Richard Reed, who was virtually identical in his act. He went to federal court. Zacarias Moussaoui went to federal court. And I think that it's a problem if we treat our legal system as sort of improvisational, that we simply go by case of what we feel someone should have in terms of rights. The credibility of a legal system is its consistency. Without consistency, it lacks coherence. And I think what Mr. Ridge is saying is that when we really don't like you or we think that we might get some information out of you, then we won't give you the rights into our system. And that creates the type of anger and, frankly, the view of hypocrisy that the United States has faced. But I think it's very unlikely. A military tribunal doesn't generate intelligence. It's not a way to generate any more intelligence than a federal trial is.
Peter, do you want to weigh in this? Or?
Well, in the Detroit case, he volunteered immediately that he got the device in Yemen, a rather big clue, that he was in contact with extremists in Yemen, a rather big clue. That was public information on Christmas Day, or maybe even or perhaps the day after. And also the idea that The other thing is, when you investigate a crime, it's not simply what the suspect says. There's a whole forensic apparatus that goes with it. I mean, the kinds of chemicals that we use, those kinds of explosives, can we match it with other kinds of attacks? I mean, there's a whole raft of other things. Even if the suspect says nothing, which is not true in this case, saying that we have to put him in a military tribunal implies that there are no other ways of the United States getting information.
There's another debate, obviously, over the Gitmo detainees, whether or not they really should remain there. We know that about a half of the detainees there are Yemeni, and that there is a possibility that they'd be sent back to Yemen. There is a huge outcry now, not only from Republicans, but some prominent Democrats. This is from Senator Dianne Feinstein. She said this in a statement: Guantanamo detainees should not be released to Yemen at this time. It is too unstable. I spoke with the Yemeni spokesman yesterday to the embassy, who said that things are very dire in his country right now, and there's a lot of debate in terms of where Mutallab should go. What is the best approach?
Well, look, I mean, I think the problem about Yemen is not simply that the government doesn't have much control over its own country. It doesn't have much control over its own prison system. And there have been 2 prison breaks by people involved in the USS Cole attack in Yemen in the past several years. And I think it's appropriate to maybe take a pause and just say, is this the right time? I mean, as a general principle, I think it's important that people be returned. But Yemen is a place which is, that's the reason there's so many Yemenis still in the jail. There's, Saudi Arabia is a much more prosperous country with a much more ability to control the returnees from Guantanamo. Yemen doesn't fit that bill.
Well, I think part of the problem is that we also are dealing with people who have never been given a trial. And we know that many of the people in Guantanamo Bay were not terrorists. At one time, we were offering thousands of dollars for anyone that could give us someone they said was a terrorist. And many of them ended up at Guantanamo Bay. And so we need to be cognizant of the fact that a nation like ours can't hold people without a trial and retain our credibility. So if we don't want to give them to Yemen, there might be good reasons not to. Then we've got to try them. If we have evidence against them, then we need to try them. But we can't leave them in this place that no rights can penetrate.
We've got to leave it there. Jonathan, Peter, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Happy holidays.